You just heard Quest for Fire from Iron Maiden, and this is the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason. And Mark, we just played arguably one of the most notoriously bad songs in Iron Maiden's back catalog.
Lyrically, above and beyond, worse than a lot.
In the time of the dinosaurs, when the dinosaurs ruled the earth, right? And he even hit some strange sour notes there, which
I don't know what the producer was thinking too there, but yeah.
And, Peace of Mind, which that record came from in 83, that's, for my money, the first half of that record is maybe, like, the strongest, like, section of songs they ever wrote, with, like, Where Eagles Dare, Revelations, Flight of Icarus, The Trooper.
Followed by some
Die With Your Boots On. And then all of a sudden it gets a little wonky at the end. I like Still Life a lot, though, with, the kind of quasi-title track, if you will.
Yeah.
But, so we're trying something different, and we'll kind of get into it a little bit with the angle we're taking with Iron Maiden coming up. But I think it's been a while. It feels like it's been a long time since we got together in podcast.
Like 4 or 5 months.
Well, not that we did Alice in Chains. I want to say like in October we did that, but basically
was that October?
Yeah, it was like September or October. But it was still very.
It's December now, though.
I know it's been a long stretch. I think when Mark moved out in June or July, and then like I had house stuff sort of going on, and you were trying to get settled in Hamtramck, and then all of a sudden you got incredibly busy, probably busier than you've ever been doing freelance stuff. Yeah. Which back in the day when you lived in Ann Arbor and I lived where I live now, Romeo, that was like an hour 15-minute stretch, but like. It just seemed like we had like open weekends where we could go and just like hammer out like 4 or 5 podcasts in like one sitting.
Yeah,
and we haven't been able to do that. I mean, it's almost we're closer than we were. About half hour away, but so it's we're not in the middle of any kind of like bitter podcasting divorce or anything weird like that.
Well, and there's the whole thing with the Merciful Fate book, and I put together a show where that took an incredible amount of time to like organize and all that as well.
So you're still doing Requiem metal-esque things. It just wasn't in the podcast.
Just took a hiatus. It's like a British show where they basically do like little seasons or something.
Yeah. So this was
still. I mean, there's so many things to go back and listen to. I mean, there's hundreds of episodes.
Yeah, it is weird, because it was like when I would have like an open weekend, Mark wouldn't, and then vice versa. It would be like when I had something going on. It was just kind of strange. I think 5 years ago when we started this whole thing, maybe we just weren't as busy. Like
I definitely wasn't.
Whether it's like social life or whatever, it just life kind of catches up. Like I'm a homeowner now. Like you're involved so much with like freelance stuff more than you were when we first started this gig.
Yeah.
So so we apologize. I know it's been a while, but we've
had a handful of emails.
Have we? Yeah.
And I'm just like, we're just real busy.
Yep, yeah.
We're gonna actually, we're gonna start doing it again like this. I think a dude sent me one a couple days ago. I'm like, we're planning on doing some this weekend. So.
Yeah. So we're here. We're here with a vengeance, and we're gonna hopefully pump out a few of these things and get on a semi get our British season back in order.
Well, and usually over the holidays, we always got a couple down days where we go and see what happens. But
we'll see if we can get to the Requiem Mansion this year. We'll have to talk about Christmas schedules and things like that.
Yeah.
But
at least for photo opportunities alone.
Yeah, exactly. And we always seem to be inspired there. I think last year we did our year ends there and our Pestilence show with Chris.
Well, it's kind of nice because it's a place where, not to totally get off topic, but there's no cell reception. So there's like no distractions at all.
So we just
you don't care what anybody else is doing because we don't know.
Yeah. And there's a hot tub. So, I mean, hot tub, pool, the combination of those things.
Bottomless drinks.
But we'll see, because my family is in a controversial, there's some family crises of disputes. No. A couple of aunts are fighting right now, and we'll see if they're even on speaking terms. But I'm nowhere in the middle of it. I just don't know if it's going to gain the opportunity to do house sitting again like we usually do. So,
yeah.
But, so, we had planned on doing this show a long time ago. We kind of talked about doing it right after the Alice in Chains, but as we said, a series of events kind of happened, and we've sort of always talked about how to approach Iron Maiden. We did the Paul Di'Anno years, which we thought was kind of a left of center approach because Bruce gets so much of the attention.
For sure.
It'd be like doing a Blaze Bailey show,
which I don't know how many people would be interested in that, but
I think we have a good listenership that believes in like us attempting anything.
Like they've got a certain taste that they can like come to respect or at least understand.
or they'd be interested in just the angle that we were going to take. Like, how are we going to come at it? And so...
Oh, because, not to give anything away too much, but we have a little bit of Blaze on here.
The Blaze might show up, especially when I reveal what this is all about. Well... So the reason we start with Quest for Fire is because it is the earliest, whether you could argue it's not a terribly historically accurate song. It's just kind of a whatever, ancient times kind of song. But, with me being a world history teacher and Mark being a bit of a Iron Maiden expert, we'll
see how my cognitive abilities work today, but yeah.
But between the two of us, we thought, well, what if we did like Iron Maiden? Because no one wants to know like the history of the band and all this shit that's
everybody's done it better than we could. Time's over.
So what angle could we take? And we decided let's do a history lesson through Iron Maiden in a sense, using their songs that deal with historical issues. At least most of them. We left a couple out in the second show because of time, and frankly, they're songs that you've heard a million times and don't need to. Yeah. But to kind of take them in sequential chronological order. And kind of
so it's almost a lesson plan.
Put a little it's put a little spin on it. So hopefully people won't be like too put off by me throwing in some history teacher asides.
Yeah, why would you? Do you understand the songs better?
Yeah, exactly. And Iron Maiden itself never put on claims that they want to be. They're a band that seeks fun. And things like that, but they're also intelligent, so they're mixing some of that. And so I you can't like say that all their songs are 100% historically accurate and things like that. They're just sort of playing.
It's like a jumping off point for a lot of it.
Exactly. But I think for kids, especially when I was getting into Iron Maiden in high school, a band like Iron Maiden that was drawing so much influence from history, from literature, from a lot of other things was a validation of some level of intelligence inside heavy metal, and I think that was what was so different than say like your Judas Priest and some of those bands, which were a little bit more about the just straightforward angle of metal, whether it was like it
was just like, I don't know, just about having fun, about having sex, about driving fast cars.
Exactly.
Like very kind of standard stuff. But yeah, Maid definitely turned it. It's like a PBS approach to
a little Downton Abbey meets I'm wondering when they should probably write a song about Downton Abbey pretty soon.
I'm sure they will at some point.
But Quest for Fire, I don't need to sort of go into too much ancient history stuff, but it kind of mixes and matches some, I don't know, mentions the dinosaurs, but I think it tries to work in like caveman kind of stuff. But it's based off of a movie from the 1980s, which
the Daryl Hannah naked one.
Yeah.
Okay, that was the only reason I watched it.
Is Ron Perlman in that? Like
probably
as a caveman?
He's got a Cro-Mag face. I mean, he's been in almost everything that's remotely that way.
Or was that Clan of the?
Clan of the Cave Bear.
That's what you're thinking with Daryl Hannah. But Quest for Fire had something. It was another caveman. I think so. I think there was some like
there's one of those
caveman sex scenes.
Yeah, like in high school, they were just like, wow, this is weird. Like it's like watching National Geographic stuff where it takes the sexuality out of it.
Yeah, there's nothing enticing about like hairy
Aboriginal boobs or something too. Like all hanging, but.
So that's kind of what Quest for Fire kind of kick starts. I guess you could call it the Paleolithic era. Which is the pre-civilization, when you essentially
when dinosaurs walked the earth.
According to the Creationist Museum, when the cavemen and the dinosaurs are both kind of hanging out. Exactly. I think what we now know is that the dinosaurs were kind of gone at this point, and by the time you get to the nomadic people, no more dinosaurs. Some mastodons, perhaps, which is very metal.
Of course.
And things like that. But yeah, you're well beyond dinosaurs by the time humans show up.
And they're not as cool as we once thought as far as their looks. Most likely they're big birds.
Yeah, exactly. But, so you get towards civilization by about like the year 10,000 BCE. And, the first cities kind of start to show up around like 8,000 BCE. Good old Mesopotamia. And then the first kind of great empires sort of emerge out of Mesopotamia, and then they sort of drift into Egypt, which is where we're going to be going next in our next set of music.
Now, in In your classes, do you use the BCE, the before the Common Era?
I do before Common Era, yeah, to sort of remove the sort of religious the subtext, because I always tell them that's a very ethnocentric kind of Western way of looking at things, the sort of Anno Domini and things like that, because it's especially because I teach AP World History, it's got to be sort of a non-Western perspective, really, and it gets kids sort of thinking about the fact that so much other life was happening outside of like Western culture, especially in terms of advanced civilizations, because for most of the sort of AD years, Europe was a hot mess, in the medieval age and dark ages and stuff like that. And I think that always sort of blows my kids' minds and how much more advanced like Islam was, and like China and even India at certain points and stuff, like compared to like the spreading shit on ourselves to like ward off evil spirits and throwing buckets of shit on the streets of
burning
Paris and stuff. So it's fun and games, but we're not quite to the medieval era yet. We'll get to those fun and games pretty soon. But we decided to sort of start the next set off with Powerslave, and this has always been one of my favorite songs, perhaps, off of.
It's it's just musically, it's a fantastic song.
The midsection, especially some of the instrumental breakdowns, the bass stuff, some of the soloing is just incredible.
And the vocal line is one of Bruce's stronger kind of performances. Where
do you rank Powerslave, like, in terms of albums for you, out of those, the sort of classic? I
mean, it used to be, it kind of depends on my mood, of course, but that was, I think, probably the big one that every single song was fantastic.
Yeah. The only song that doesn't,
like Number of the Beast, it like held up almost as good, but like, Peace of Mind was where I started. And that's got some turds, which kind of...
And the second half, yeah.
Yeah, but that was, I think, front to back, kind of like their next big leap.
I think for me, Powerslave might be, to me, the most listenable of all their records from start to finish. There are some songs on Number of the Beast that are, like, for me, a little bit, like, I guess, forgettable, like Gangland, and I'm not even really a big fan of Invaders, which we're going to be playing later, but...
The Invaders seems like it's a leftover, really, from previous
And even Steve
stuff.
Harris has commented, like, Invaders, like, he wasn't a big fan of having that be a kickoff out, to start the whole record. It was kind of a weak thing. But luckily,
it's kind of a cliche song.
Really. Run to the Hills and Number of the Beast and Hallowed Be Thy Name and 22 Acacia Avenue, shit, stuff like that really helped boost it up. But yeah, Powerslave for me has always been, I think, from start to finish, maybe the most consistent.
I mean, it might
record.
be because that was like their big. They were coming off their like a huge amount of success stateside. Too, and like going into studio. I don't know if they recorded. I think they recorded that in like Jamaica or something.
Yeah, or Nassau,
Bahamas.
Yep, the Bahamas. I remember.
So
that.
I think they had just had kind of like complete freedom.
Yep,
and
really relaxed, not a lot
lots
of pressure.
Of time, and so I think everything just kind of came together.
Because I think they said like on Peace of Mind and I think on Peace of Mind and Powerslave, those were the first records where like they had to sit down with like no songs.
Yeah.
Like, whereas like Number of the Beast, they had written a lot of those prior to even Bruce joining, or at least sketched out parts of them.
And those first couple records, I mean, that stuff was sitting around for years.
Floating around for a while. Yeah. So, but Powerslave is, a song it's about like a kind of a dying or failing Egyptian pharaoh kind of cursing the gods at the end, they mention sort of slaves, which, there's some speculation over whether slaves built the pyramids or not. There's not like a terrible amount of proof, because what they're actually finding is that there was a significant amount of people building the pyramids that were actually being paid. One of the things that they were being paid in was beer, which was actually invented in Mesopotamia. And the reason that they had beer was so prominent in like Egypt and Mesopotamia is because clean water was so hard to find. It was actually safer to drink beer than it was like clean water, and so that was like kind of one of their early forms of payment and stuff. But yeah, it brings up Ra and especially Osiris. Yes, I'm trying to remember which god is brought up in Powerslave. It's either Osiris or Horus. Yeah.
Get a little King Diamond.
We get a little King Diamond. I was just mentioning that like using some of these songs in my classroom would be pretty funny.
Oh yeah.
I do use an Enslaved song to teach them about little Viking metal, 793 from Eld. Yeah, but yeah, so Powerslave kind of invokes, it's talking about some of the Egyptian mythology and the religions and stuff like that, and Horus and Osiris and Ra, these the sun god, some of that aspect was obviously very important to the Egyptian culture, with their mummification and their advanced sort of view of the afterlife was what made Egypt so like unique at that time, because you didn't really see anybody that took the amount of care to preserve life
or like living for the afterlife.
Yeah, really sort of, and that's kind of what the song in the chorus, right? It says something about that.
I'd have to be a power slave. Blah, blah, blah. I'm a man. Why can't I live on, or something?
Something, yeah. And of course, the pharaohs were believed to be gods on earth, and so the Great Pyramids were built as these tombs to preserve them and different things in the old dynasty era. This song kind of makes me feel like it's more like New Dynasty, like the times of like Ramses the Great and stuff like that, when Egypt was kind of at its biggest height. But who's to say?
Was that right before Rome sacked them?
No, you're a ways away from that. They get sacked by other groups far before that, like the Babylonians and the Hittites, the Assyrians, all kinds of different
stuff you hear about in the Bible.
Yeah, a lot of those groups kind of come in and wrestle.
Letter from the Corinthians.
Yeah, because I think the old dynasty or the new dynasty with Ramses, ends somewhere around like 800. So you're still like 300 years before even the founding of the Roman Republic, before they even kind of get going. So, but yeah, we got a couple of Powerslave lined up, and then we got a couple of Greek tunes lined up as well. And we can we'll chat a little bit more about the Greek history, because the sort of Greek history songs kind of get us from the ancient era into what's known as classical history, Mark. So we got Powerslave from the Powerslave record in 1984, followed by Flight of Icarus, about Greek mythology from Peace of Mind, another Peace of Mind tune, and then Alexander the Great from Somewhere in Time.
His name struck fear into hearts of men, I hear.
Yes, it did. And notice there's a really cool, almost like Slayer-like breakdown.
It's a really weird doomy thing where it almost sounds like it should have like a chime after it or something, but totally un-Maiden-esque, and that's like, I don't know, it's about 2/3 way through the song.
So look out for that. It's kind of a little tidbit. So enjoy.
Into the abyss I fall, the eye of horrors. Into the eyes of the night, watching me go. Green is the cat's eye that glows in this temple. Enter the risen Osiris, risen again.
My son, ask for thyself another kingdom, for that which I leave is too small for thee.
that was Powerslave, Flight of Icarus, and you just heard Alexander the Great from the aforementioned Somewhere in Time. And
the oddball song on that record, really, I think.
Yeah, it's weird. It's longer than anything else on that record.
And it's very, very Steve Harris.
Yeah.
In every aspect.
Very progressive and different things like that. Yeah, I mean, that's a record, too, that's so rooted in... I guess, like, you think of, like, a song like Wasted Years and stuff, which is kind of about... I mean, it's, like, really a grounded song. It's not so fantasy-based.
It's just about, like, not letting life pass you by and, you know.
Yeah, Loneliness, A Long-Distance Runner, and
I think a lot of that has... I mean, Adrian Smith wrote... I'm just completely blanked on the fucking song now.
Wasted Years?
Wasted Years.
Oh, yeah.
That's completely him, and I think that's bringing his more, like, the Urchin stuff, that like, this previous band, more just kind of like a rock.
Do you think they were burnt out on touring at that point? And there's, like, a lot of songs that are sort of reflecting, like, how much they've been on the road, like, since, like, Number of the Beast?
That could be, because, that was they basically toured nonstop, recorded, you know.
I mean, even, like, Live After Death was the year before Somewhere in Time, you know, so, I mean, they spent time putting this live record together and different things.
I think that's when a lot of there's like some butting heads in the band too, because Harris is always kind of, you know, he's the helmsman of the whole boat here, but then, you know, Bruce, he had to give up a little bit for him to fit in, and then Adrian started to be a little bit more, I guess, assertive. And not, because who wants to be in a band where you don't have any kind of creative input except for Dave Murray?
Sure.
Like, I think he's only credited with writing partially writing a handful of songs.
So Murray's kind of like he's just kind of like there to play solos.
He's a player. Yeah. He doesn't. He never seems. I think he might have done a couple on A Matter of Life and Death, but he's always been kind of a background guy. Really.
Yeah, and that makes sense, you know. But I think we sort of pointed out in Alexander the Great that, like, the sort of weird progginess of that song is almost like a hint towards Seventh Son, which will be the record after it.
Yeah,
you know, and that's such a weird record in and of itself. We happened to see Maiden do their Seventh Son tour this summer, which was cool, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of a once-in-a-lifetime sort of chance to see him play, like, that many songs from that record. I'm still hoping for, like, a 30th anniversary Peace of Mind tour this summer, but I think that's a long shot. We'll see.
I don't know. I don't know how many more years they got of that kind of stuff. I mean, if it's just, like, these big festival dates and stuff, it's probably not.
Because I can't see him doing because next year would be the No Prayer for the Dying. And no one's going to give a shit about that.
No.
So, yeah. Anyways. But, anyways, the last two songs you heard there kind of deal with, you know, what I hinted at is the beginning of what's known as the classical era. And the sort of four great classical civilizations are Rome, Greece, and then Han China and Gupta India. And I'm not going to talk about Han China and Gupta India, but that's sort of when, like, most of the major world religions started to evolve. Even not really so much in Greece, but obviously Christianity's born in Rome, and then
like philosophy and critical thinking started.
You know, Socrates and sort of the Greek, you know, birth of the Greek thinkers like your Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, some of these guys. But even like the Greek scientists that were sort of coming out of Greece, that's sort of their major contribution, as well as Athenian democracy, you know, with you know, the beginning of that, and then the sort of idea of republicanism, not Republicans,
but a republic.
Yeah, republic. You know, being born out of like places like Rome and stuff like that. But you know, you had Confucianism going on in China. You had Buddhism emerges in India in this time. Even like Hinduism sort of comes together as like a unit, because before that, Hinduism was just like pagan, local village pagan beliefs that people just called Hindus, you know. They didn't really refer to themselves as some universal like world religion, you know. The British actually come up with the term Hinduism in like the 1800s, because they're like trying to figure out the hell the locals are doing, like with these 30 million gods.
Take control of them.
Yeah, exactly. But Flight of Icarus kind of taps into sort of the pre-classical Greece, you know, the kind of time of like, you know, Homer's Odyssey and the Iliad, you know, when Greece is still like these sort of like primitive city-states and things like that, you know, post-Trojan War era, where Greece doesn't really have democracy yet. You know, you don't have a lot of the roots of like sort of the philosophy, and they're very superstitious, and the Greek mythology kind of comes in. And of course, the story of Icarus is this sort of, you know,
it's just a parable, really.
Yeah, it's a classic parable about, you know, a guy who was told by his father to avoid, you know, using his winged power to fly too close to the sun, and he doesn't listen to his father, and his wings melt, and he plummets to the earth, kind of dead. You know, I always saw this as like a a cool like teenage rebellion kind of song. Like I used to run to this in high school when I would go for like runs and things like that. And I always thought it'd be cool to like score like a shitty cliche like sports movie like track moment to like Flight of Icarus, when he's like doing
Prefontaine.
Prefontaine, some kind of like marathon type movie, like
I think that's for some reason that movie has come up a lot lately.
Really?
Just in random places.
My kids talk about all the time.
It's a good movie.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, it was just I have no interest in watching a movie about somebody running.
Yeah.
But the dude had a good mustache, and it was like,
classic mustache. And it crosses over like weird politics and stuff there because the whole like Munich Olympics and the kidnapping of the Jewish athletes and all that kind of crazy shit. That's why he wasn't able to like run a couple of his last races at the Olympics, and then he died in a car crash. Kind of sad. But anyways, not to talk about 1970s American running culture. But yeah, I think Flight of Icarus is like a nice sort of mythology song. And granted, it's not historical based, so you could make the argument, there's no real Icarus or whatever. But the idea of mythology was so important to the Greeks that it really sort of fit like their superstitious lifestyles and stuff. And just like the Romans, who kind of like modeled the same type of gods and goddesses that the Greeks did, almost like borrowing the same ones and just changing some of the names oftentimes.
Yeah.
Like it was more, like you said, like a parable, like guidelines, to like live your life by and things like that. But they don't, they think that like fatalism was sort of like coming from the gods, that the gods just sort of like played with our lives and, did whatever they wanted to us and stuff.
Whatever at their behest,
at
things
their
would
whimsy.
happen.
Yeah. And so that's why like when you see things like Christianity emerge, like it gave at least some kind of like structure. You can see what the appeal would have been in terms of like against some of the pagan beliefs at the time, which were like your life's kind of not even in your hands. Whereas like Christianity at least said, well, here's this like fantasy land that
here's a virtual thing
that you can go to.
Or if you have a virtuous life, you'll have a great afterlife.
So, and especially that appealed to like all the oppressed people, the slaves and poor. I mean, that's where... Well,
that's still kind of where it's the most...
Yeah, exactly. The highest concentration you see today, We won't get into that yet, but definitely. But then Alexander the Great, he sort of like ends the Greek era, the classical era of Greece in a way, because what he did, as the song alludes to, is he not only goes around and like conquers Greece and unifies Greece for the first time, and that's one of the things like people don't maybe understand, is that Greece was never really an empire. It was a bunch of like city states that like all fought each other, like you've seen in like 300 for, I'm sure, pop culture wise. A lot of people are aware, like Sparta and Athens were kind of rivals and some of that. And it was true, like they weren't really united. They fought against the Persians in that war, united, but then afterwards they kind of went back to their respective corners of like influence. Yeah. But Alexander sort of like forces everybody to like be united for the first time in Greece. And then, he's kind of like this punk 19-year-old with a chip on his shoulder, and he just goes from there and he conquers Persia, conquers Babylon, Mesopotamia, goes into Egypt, conquers Egypt, and then goes all the way to like the borders of like Gupta India, India, And so, he builds the world's largest empire that anybody ever seen. And one of the things that was so cool about Alexander the Great, which the song, I guess, alludes to, is he mixed and matched culture a lot. And that was kind of cool because,
according to the song, he paved the way for Christianity.
Yeah, in a sense, he did, because what he did is he like broke down a lot of the, like people from Greece would have never known about India had it not been for like Alexander. And he takes
everything
a lot
was real insular back then.
Yeah, and he creates like this sort of like common like bonded culture called Hellenistic Greece, which is like, he kind of took like a little bit of India, a little bit of Babylon, a little bit of Egypt and Greece, and mixed it all together. And like, if you've seen,
it's like the first melting pot of
exactly,
the world,
it's like a huge melting pot sort of thing. And so he brought back like mathematics from India, which was like they were way more advanced than we were, and like mixed it with some of the philosophical stuff that Aristotle and those guys were sort of doing. And Aristotle was actually Alexander the Great's tutor, so he was sort of raised to be like this sort of god on earth in a weird way. Because Plato wrote this book, and I'm going kind of off the rails here, but Plato wrote this crazy book called The Republic, which is like this idea of like a utopian society. And it's like a major critique of democracy, because Plato hated democracy because democracy put his teacher, Socrates, to death. Like it sentenced him to death because Socrates was a critic of democracy. He said it was like mob rule and the idiots were in charge and all this.
If you listen to fools,
yeah,
my
exactly.
rules.
Yeah, exactly. See, there's a way to work metal into all this stuff. But kind of what happened was like Aristotle and Plato both believed that instead of democracy, you needed like what's called a philosopher king. Mm-hmm. And so I think like when he tutored Alexander, he was hired by his dad, also known as Val Kilmer. For those of you, no.
He was basically grooming him for what he'd become.
Exactly. And so Alexander kind of thought like, I'll go out and do this. And there's this cool story I tell my kids where Alexander goes to see the Oracle of Delphi, which if you've seen 300, it's a dancing naked chick who inhales like gas to basically have these mass hallucinations. Yeah. She says, well,
opium or something?
Well, it's like this gas that was leaking out of the ground. It was like this.
Oh, okay.
It was like getting her like, it was like methane, like kind of sniffing. But, she says, you can conquer the world only if you untie this unknown, this knot that could not be untied, like the Gordian's knot.
Yeah.
And as legend sort of says, like what he did is he sat and like stared at it for a while, and then like he got up one day after kind of like trying to figure out this knot. He just took out a sword and cut it in half. And he was like, that's kind of his like badass, like I untied it.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh,
that's like
no one ever thought of doing that.
The Captain Kirk. What the hell is that called?
The Maru,
Kobayashi Maru scenario.
Exactly. So Alexander is like Captain Kirk in Wrath of Khan, right? Isn't that what they bring it up? So there you go.
Perfect.
Pop culture comes full circle. But apparently he did pave the way because of this Hellenistic world for maybe the rise of Christianity. Who the hell knows? But kind of to sort of end things with the classical era, the next song we're going to kind of get into is just an instrumental, but it's an allusion to the famous middle of March known as the Ides of March. And this is a song, kicks off Killers. And thought about playing this alongside Wrathchild because I almost always like think of these two songs like they almost link together in a way. But
it's such a weird. Well, I guess thematically they don't fit at all.
There's like Wrathchild. I don't really think it has anything to do with Julius Caesar, but supposedly the story goes
pickup truck out of money out of luck.
And with Julius Caesar on the day, he was given warning by this soothsayer that said, "Beware of the Ides of March," and that's of course the day he marches into the Roman Senate near the end of the Roman Republic.
Et tu, Brute?
Et tu, Brute, yeah, and he's stabbed to death by a bunch of senators who thought he was becoming a little bit too dictatorial.
Yeah.
Ironically, a little civil war breaks out after that, and then his nephew, Octavian, becomes the first Roman emperor, also known as Augustus Caesar.
Was he the first one to bring Christianity into...
Christianity actually shows up during his era, but I think he's fairly unaware of it, other than like what the bullshit that was kind of happening in like the Palestinian state, but that was more like dealing with the local governor and the Palestinian guards and stuff. I don't think, from what I know, he paid a terrible amount of attention. It's some of the later emperors that come that get really into it, like Nemo.
Okay.
Or Nero. Not Nemo. Nero is the guy that like used to crucify Christians upside down, and then he'd light them on fire as like torches to light his garden. Like I mean, just some wicked.
Well, if you want to know more about that, you can listen to The Age of Nero by Sturkon.
Yeah, exactly. So Nero's quite a badass, but so Ides of March is this reference to the death of Caesar, I guess, and as the Roman era sort of ends, the classical era ends, and certainly the culture that Alexander and Caesar and the Romans and Greeks created sort of falls into a bit of ruin, known as the Dark Ages and medieval kind of times.
Nothing happened.
Yeah, and so the songs after this are dealing with that, and we'll talk a little bit more about what's going on with those. So we've got the Ides of March from Killers up next, and then we've got the aforementioned Invaders, which kicked off Number of the Beast in 1982. And then I'm going to attempt this pronunciation, but I don't speak French. Montsegur, one of those two. Segur, yeah, Segur. From Dance of Death from 03, and then we're going to end this set with another instrumental from Killers, Genghis Khan. So enjoy Ides of March. that was Genghis Khan, Montsegur, Invaders, and the Ides of March. So, what are, before I go into my history realm or whatever, what are some of your thoughts on these songs as songs, from like a Iron Maiden fan perspective? Kind of a random sampling.
Invaders a little bit, which it's just kind of boring altogether. But I've always been a fan of the Maiden instrumentals, which they haven't really done much in the last 25 years.
Yeah, it seems like really, they kind of abandoned that after Powerslave, right? I can't think of anything from those later records.
No, I mean, I guess there's a little bit on the opener to Final Frontier. It's that I want to say Assault on Precinct 13, but it's like Asteroid 13 or whatever.
Something, yeah.
Where Adrian Smith put together like this weird little tribal drum beat thing, which it doesn't fit. But we were talking before we recorded that I think Alexander the Great would have been just a great instrumental song without. It's got such a weird, I guess, vocal. I don't know. It's just like somebody basically standing up there and singing a lesson out of a book,
Yeah.
It's so just matter of fact and like this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened kind of thing.
Sure.
But
like, so Genghis Khan, where's that rate for you as like an instrumental?
I think it's one of their better ones. I think Transylvania is probably one of my favorite instrumentals.
Rumor has it we're going to be hearing Transylvania in one of these shows coming up, I would imagine. Yeah, there's some history behind Transylvania from what I've
Vlad Tepes fella.
Yeah. I've always dug Genghis Khan too. I mean, I think what there's several instrumentals on Killers, and I think it like helps the flow of the album almost. Like, I don't want to say breathing room because they're not meant to be like throwaway tracks, but it like
I don't know. It adds something that not a whole lot of bands like that were doing at that. I mean, I don't think has Priest ever done an instrumental.
Not that I don't want to say no. I feel like maybe on Sad Wings or maybe Sin After Sin, there might have been something that could have been. Oh, you know what? They did the Hellion, which is a badass instrumental.
Okay.
But
it's almost an intro.
Yeah, it's an intro to Electric Eye, but it's I guess an intro nonetheless.
Yeah, because even like some Sabbath did it a little bit as well. Like it's something that
Orchid and some of that stuff.
Yeah, trying to like actually work it into this like just really like frenetic music. I think it was interesting and kind of. Not necessarily groundbreaking, but it's interesting to put it into this genre,
Sure. Well, from a historical angle, Invaders is pretty straightforward for those people that kind of know
just as the music
lyrics.
is.
Yeah, I mean, it's about kind of the Viking assaults from Denmark on a lot of English settlements, which that stuff kind of started in the late kind of 700s, 793 to be exact, from the Enslaved song that we were talking about before.
Yeah.
That's kind of the first assault on Linsfarne, and then from there they just kind of kept sacking British settlements, and that's actually why a lot of castle building started around that time with Charlemagne. When the Vikings went down from England into like mainland Europe, Charlemagne was like crowned the Holy Roman Emperor around the year 800, and one of the things he did was started like emphasizing a lot more like fortification to protect against the Viking assaults and stuff. And then essentially what happened to the Vikings is like they just kind of converted eventually. They sort of like blended into like European society, and that was it, because for a long time the Vikings were like the fucking terror of Europe. They brought a lot of instability to British and mainland European society.
Which they probably need to be knocked down a couple pegs.
Yeah, exactly. But it kind of helped keep, I think, unfortunately, Western Europe trapped in the sort of the Dark Ages a little bit longer. Because one of the things is when Christianity took over after the fall of Rome, fall of Western Rome, because Eastern Rome actually survives. It's known as the Byzantine Empire and Constantinople and all that kind of stuff. And but Western Rome, like, they look to the church to sort of be their like unification, because they don't really have, they're like fallen into like all these rival kingdoms, and so the only unifying force is Catholicism. And that unfortunately builds a sort of vast, I guess, Vatican empire where they have total control over like these kingdoms and stuff. And there became like a lot of convert or die type stuff that was going on during that time period, where like people like Charlemagne would go, and if he found like pagan settlements, it was basically converter, like, I'm just going to slaughter all of you, because there was like no choice given. And so that's where they kind of wipe out paganism as a whole. And so when the Vikings show up as these like pagans, kind of freaks Europe out again, because it's like, shit, we got to fight off more pagans. Not to mention that these guys had like such speed, coming off of the waterways and some of their just their weapons were kind of superior.
There's like warriors to the core. The entire lifestyle was built around it almost.
Exactly. And so that's kind of what's going on in Invaders. And then Montsegur is a little bit more cerebral, but it's kind of about a fortress in southeast France. And kind of at the end of the Crusades, there was several crusades, 8 in total, but 4 main ones. And this isn't really dealing with like sort of the
9 if you include the last crusade.
Yes, this is true of India, which you might be bringing up here in a moment. Rumor has it,
maybe.
But like the last couple were almost like self-contained Europe versus Europe crusades, not so much like Muslims versus Christians like the early ones. And this is like one where like sort of a group of, I guess, hardcore Catholics come in and they're trying to wipe out a group of like Gnostic Christians, and the Gnostics are like the ones that believe in like the parts that were edited out of the Bible by Constantine. I mean, it goes beyond that, but that's just sort of the basic of it. And I don't know a lot about Gnosticism, but if you watch History Channel enough, there's all these bullshit specials about like hidden mysteries of the Bible and whatever.
Oh yeah,
but the Gnostics were sort of
like Hitler's brain.
Yeah, exactly.
Hitler's
and alien attacks and like log jamming and shit like that.
Log jamming.
But basically they were seen as heretics, like because they believed in things that were like discluded from the Bible, including a lot of like passages from like women. You can't have that, obviously. Women, clearly didn't know anything.
Place of power, no way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so they were a pretty radical group. And in 1244, these Cathars, the Gnostic Christians, surrendered after they were basically sieged by 10,000 French soldiers. And 200 of them were burned in a bonfire just for shits and giggles. Jeez. Why not?
That'll teach them.
Yeah, I'll teach them. So that's kind of what's going on in that song from Maiden. And then, of course, Genghis Khan, which we just sort of ended with. He's kind of like... He always gets voted in my class as like the most important figure in world history, and I don't think he gets like enough credit. In fact, this is a crazy statistic, but I think it's like 25% of the world's human beings can trace their bloodlines back to like Genghis Khan.
From the raping and pillaging?
Raping and pillaging, and just all the places that he was like able to settle. Because, he conquers China, he conquers the entire Middle East, all of Eastern Europe, all of Russia, northern India. Like the world's largest empire still to this day was the Khanate of the Genghis Khan and his sons and grandsons and different people like that. And so he's a bit of a badass, And he was this dude that was like a nomad that lived north of China. That's where the Mongols were, and he kind of grew up with a chip on his shoulder because like rival tribes kidnapped his wife and killed his mom, and so he just kind of like he was pissed off at like North China for like messing with this shit and just started there.
Vengeance is a great.
Went to Islam, just kept going, just kept conquering, and lucky for Western Europe that he one of his sons or grandsons died, and he had been like after Genghis Khan dies, like his son or his grandson took over. I can't remember which. I think it's his son Ogedi or something like that. And they're like the Mongol army was standing like on the edge, about to invade and just destroy Western Europe. And this Khan, Genghis's son, dies, and there's a giant funeral. And so those forces were about to invade, and they're called home. And they never come back. And like literally that moment may have spared, like it may have allowed Europe to like experience the Renaissance and like actually get our shit together out of the Dark Ages.
Otherwise,
and so like
would have been years.
Genghis Khan like did so much like random stuff. Like him like conquering Russia is what kept like Russia in the Dark Ages and 200 years behind the rest of Europe for so long. Like, there's this joke, Russia was constantly playing catch up to the rest of Europe and stuff. He just fucks up Islam completely so that the Turks can kind of become the new power, and the Arabs sort of lose that, and that's when the Ottomans kind of come in, and just he just messes the whole world up in a way that you can reshuffle the power structure. He knocks China down a few pegs from where they had been, and he's ultimately just a badass, and apparently he liked to screw a lot of chicks too and spread the Genghis Khan seed across the world. So what better way to end in an Iron Maiden kind of sense? But we got one tune left, and this is a tune I'm not that familiar with, kind of controversial. Tell us a little bit about the song itself, I guess, and then I'll give you.
Yeah, the Clansman is from the Virtual 11 record, which is probably one of the worst Iron Maiden records ever.
Yeah, probably up there with No Prayer for the Dying, right? Is it a tie between those two, would you say?
It's, yeah.
I can't think of two worse ones, really.
This is the only song I actually remember. I just bought this again just so I could like re-experience it again. But there's a whole like really shitty soccer theme on the cover. And,
awesome. Terrible color scheme and graphics on the front.
It was a dark day. This is the second Blaze Bayley record after the X Factor, which is, I don't know what, if people have ever like actually gone back and like re-examined it. It's a pretty solid record.
I think it holds
it's
up
just not.
It's just not Bruce Dickinson singing. Yeah. Musically, it's pretty good.
But Maiden's gone through all these different things. I don't know why they couldn't. Maybe put it in Bond terms, like it's like the Timothy Dalton ones. Like they were pretty decent, but he just got the short end of the stick.
I just watched Living Daylights the other day. Not so bad.
Not so bad. He's like a weird mix of Roger Moore and what's his face, Lazenby.
George Lazenby.
Yeah, he's one of. I think him and Craig are my favorites. But
yeah, Lazenby. I love his movie. It's my favorite movie. I can't really say he's my favorite Bond.
I don't know.
It's like Honor Majesty's Secret Service is so great, despite some of his shortcomings, but I don't mind him. I don't mind him. Yeah, I think he would have gotten good after a couple movies. He just never had the chance, But
I think this song it's kind of a precursor to what will happen with the more proggy stuff that Maiden's going to kind of do in the 2000s, like where Harris really kind of 10, 11, 12, 14-minute songs.
And they actually appreciate this song enough that, like, even in the Dickinson era, they performed this on the Rock in Rio live concert and stuff. So, I mean, that says a lot when, like...
That Man on the Edge is another track off.
But that's off
X Factor.
X Factor,
And then Sign of the Cross or Sign of the
Southern Cross off Mob Rules.
I think it's just Sign of the Cross.
Yeah, I think it is Sign of the Cross. That was on Best of the Beast. Done that as well. Right.
Yeah, and that was on X Factor.
And
Man on the Edge is just all about falling down the Michael Douglas movie.
Oh yeah. It's a good losing it kind of movie, the late '80s, But all you're really getting with the Clansman is this. I guess Steve Harris wrote this after seeing like Braveheart and Rob Roy, which is another like kind of Scottish heritage, kind of movie.
Yeah, there's nothing KKK about this at all.
No, nothing. And it's really sort of about William Wallace, and the Scottish clan that fighting off the British in like 1300s. Late 1200s, early 1300s, and he's famous for defeating the English army at the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297, and then William Wallace is finally captured by the Brits after he loses the Battle of Falkirk, and that's when he's drawn and quartered, which is a fun way of getting torn apart and shit. Very metal. Exactly. Almost like the Iron Maiden torture technique from... was it Man with the Iron Mask or Three Musketeers, I think is where they take the name Iron Maiden from. One of the Alexander Dumas novels. So
is that where it was actually named?
That's where the Iron Maiden torture technique was actually first showed up in literature. Yeah, so
basically just a coffin with spikes in it.
Yeah, fun. I just remember Iron Maiden learning about it actually from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. That's like
I've still never seen that movie.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Never.
Yeah, it's the first one's worth like watching if it's on TV or something. But But anyways, so we're ending in a controversial manner with a Blaze Bayley song, but it fits our historical themes because we've already made it, Mark, all the way up to the 1300s now. We've gone from ancient times of dinosaurs all the way to the High Middle Ages. We're damn near the Renaissance at this point. So good stuff. But hopefully you've allowed us to humorously aside you with our ridiculous take on Iron Maiden. Hopefully we didn't bother you too much with it because we're just, as they would say in England, just taking a piss. That's as they say, having a little fun,
having a laugh.
But let us know what you thought. Shoot us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com or check us out on Facebook. We are still alive on Mark and Jason there.
It's just
requiempodcast.com. You can check out the website, and then a lot of the stuff Mark alluded to, some of the projects he's involved in, you can find there. If you still haven't gotten your copy of
Satan is Alive, A Tribute to Merciful Fate.
Yeah, you still have some of those, right?
Yeah, but it's going to have to be repressed again. So
running
get them while they're hot.
Get them while they're hot. That's pretty awesome. So anyways, we hope you enjoyed all this, and stick around next week for part 2 when we get into the modern times, modern wars, things like that. So for Iron Maiden and the Clansman, I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.
See what they do, they're grinding us down, they're taking our land that belongs to the clans, not alone with a dream, just a want to be free, with a need to belong. I am a Clansman. take anymore. No, we can't let them take anymore. We're the land of the free. No, no, we can't let them take anymore. No, we can't let them take anymore. We're the land of the free. No, no, we can't let them take anymore. No, we can't let them take anymore.